Hello Matlab programmers, we're going to keep going with our discussion on plotting. So to plot something you need to know what values you want to display on the x-axis and what values you want to display on the y-axis. What are all the points that you're plotting. To create your vector of x values, you can either in parentheses do comma separated or space separated list of values, or in this case, if you're just incrementing by 1 each time, it would make a lot of sense to use the colon operator and say I want to go from 1 to 4. And that's so much easier than typing out every number by hand. In fact, let's go from 1 to 10. And now for each of those x values, I want to create y values. And the function I picked out of the textbook was x squared minus 10x plus 15. So for each of these x values, like 0, if you were to plug 0 in place of x, 0 squared minus 10 times 0 plus 15, you would see that 15 is the answer. And if you were to plug in 1 into this formula, you get 6. If you plug in 2, you get -1. So we get a y value for every single x value. And notice that the dimensions or the size of these two vectors or matrices are the same. They both have 1 row and 11 columns. So now that I have that, I can go ahead and plot x versus y, and it'll come up as this figure. And I can add on to that figure if I'd like a title that describes what it is I'm plotting. I can use a title function and say I'm plotting x squared minus 10x plus 15, and that'll appear as, sometimes it gets buried behind the Matlab window, but it's up there as the title. We can label our x-axis and our y-axis. I'm going to just put x on the x-axis. I'm not very creative this morning. And for the y label, I'll be more creative. I'll say Matlab is fun. And so now I've got my x label axis labeled and my y axis labeled. We can also turn on and off the grid. Sometimes if with the grid on, it's easier to see exactly where your points are on the graph. And I could also do grid off if I don't like that feature. What else can we customize about the graph? Well, we can customize everything. Instead of just showing a solid line, what if we want to show the individual points? Well, then in our plot command, we're going to have a third optional argument. We pass in the x vector, the y vector, and then we can pass in, I'm going to pass in R for red, and I'm going to pass in 2 dashes to say I want a dashed line between these, a dashed red line. If I want just the points to show up, I could say I want just circular points to show up, and so it's plotting all these points. And it's hard for me to remember all of the options, so I've got it on a PowerPoint slide that I'll just move over here. So these are the colors that you can pick that they're already built into MATLAB. B for blue, G for green, R for red. It would be the color either of the lines or the points. Here are the different styles. If you want to show the individual points, they can show up as dots or circles or X's. And then if you want to connect the points, you can do it with a solid line, a dotted line, a dashed line. We can also set up some line properties. The width of the line, the marker, if you're marking the point, what color is the marker, how big is the marker size, what's the color of not only the outline, but the face, so the inside of the point. So let's experiment with a few of those with this function. So I've got my individual point showing with circles, and let's also do a solid line. I'm going to try a line width of 3 and a marker size of 12, and let's see how that affects the graph. And again, it's hidden behind my MATLAB screen. Well, the line width makes this a lot larger, and the marker size, we can see the individual points are showing up much larger than they were before. We can keep going and try the other properties. Line properties, the marker edge color. Let's say we want that to be green, and then we could do the marker face color, and that could be blue. And let's try that. And we'll see our graph. And so we're getting quite a colorful, interesting looking graph. So use whichever of these line properties makes sense to make your graph more readable. Okay, completely different topic. Formatting the output in Matlab. So when you type in something like pi, it decides the default way of displaying that. There are other ways you can display pi. We could do format long, which displays our numbers with 14 digits after the decimal point. Seems like a little overkill for most problems. A favorite one that I like is format bank. So if you're dealing with money, it's common to just have 2 places after the decimal point. And again, there are a lot of different ways to format things. Format short, format long, short E, short G, long E, long G, format bank, hex for hexadecimal, rat for a ratio of small integers, compact. If you notice, sometimes when you're typing, there's a lot of empty lines in Matlab, and if you want to, I've got mine set to format compact so I can show you more. Format loose is the default, and in that case, like, there's a lot of blank lines in between displaying things. So I'm going to switch this back to format compact, and I'll show you one more, that format rat, the format something as a ratio of small integers. So I have something, if I have a number like x is equal to 5, and I do that as format rat, so how would we display x as a ratio of small integers? Well, 0.5 is the same thing as 1 over 2. So sometimes it's convenient to display things that way. So that's a long enough lecture for today. Enjoy your MATLAB programming.